At this stage, the Swiss Child Protection Agency has full authority over where our daughter is treated. And they have mandated that she be treated at the Geneva Public Hospital, which has the gender affirmative model.
We just sat down with a father whose daughter was taken away from him by Swiss authorities. She's now in the care of the state because her father would not agree to allow her to undergo an attempted gender transition to go from being a girl to try to be a boy. Represented by ADF International, this father is fighting back for his daughter. Do you know where your daughter is right now?
She's currently in the custody of the Swiss authorities, living at a government-funded residence. The Swiss judiciary took custody of our daughter about 1.5 years ago.
When did she first tell you that she didn't believe she was actually a girl?
When she was 13, she told us that she was actually a boy. She sat us down and she handed us a letter which introduced herself as a boy and explained to us that she would now be her more authentic self. We later found that that letter was essentially cut and pasted from a trans advocacy website. The three of us had a conversation where we said, this is a surprise. We will listen to you. We're concerned about this. We will seek medical advice and we will take decisions together. We'll learn as we go along. We'll all educate ourselves collectively and individually. And our first port of call was, of course, reaching out to our pediatrician for medical advice. The pediatrician referred us to the Geneva Public Hospital. The first appointment was opened with our daughter going into a one-on-one meeting, and she came out of that meeting about 30 or 40 minutes later. And then we came in, all met collectively with this medical staff. And the medical staff explained to us that she had gone through the gender unicorn with our daughter, and our daughter had indicated certain preferences, certain orientations, and it may be a case where our child was suffering from gender dysphoria. We met with then a psychiatrist who's heading this specific unit for children at the Geneva Public Hospital. And the psychiatrist heading that unit explained to us that if our daughter was expressing preferences to be treated as a boy, to be treated with male pronouns, to cut her hair, to dress as a boy, then we should respect that and support that. If she asks for us to give her binders to conceal her breasts, then we should do that. In other words, the message was we should be supportive of her belief that she's a boy.
What was your gut telling you?
We're going to take medical advice. And if this is what the medical authority is telling us, then we take it seriously. On the other hand, our inclination toward the LGBTQI umbrella is positive. And so our assumption was, well, we should listen, we should learn.
And so at this stage in the game, you're being told by all these medical professionals that these things are necessary for your daughter. Did you agree, and did you move forward?
We agreed to give our daughter a binder. We agreed to allow her to cut her hair. We supported her tepidly in appearing as a man in terms of her dress. We did not agree to allow to call her by a masculine name, nor to refer to her with male pronouns.
Why not?
I think at that stage, at that initial stage, things were moving very quickly, and we wanted to make sure that we were informed, and that seemed quite radical to us. Over a period of 3 months, through the same unit at the Geneva Public Hospital, we met both individually and collectively with the psychiatric team. In those meetings, we as parents explained to the psychiatrist a lot of the background, that our daughter had had issues with anxiety before and been seen by a psychiatrist previously, that our daughter was of high intellectual capacity and at some point had even been moved ahead 2 grades in school. We explained that our family had been separated for work reasons for the previous 3 years. Those previous 3 years also overlapped with the pandemic, when our daughter spent more than a healthful amount of time in her room on her computer. She at that point was just entering Puberty was just entering the adolescent years. And our request to the medical team was to ensure that our daughter be treated comprehensively and assessed comprehensively from this perspective, taking all these factors and this background into account.
And what was the response?
The response of the Geneva Public Hospital was, if you've arrived at our offices, then a decision's already been taken. The next step is puberty blockers. And when we questioned that, it was explained to us that if we wanted a full psychological or psychiatric assessment, then we should pursue private treatment. We should pursue private psychotherapeutic treatment rather than proceeding with the protocol at the Geneva Public Hospital. And so we said, thank you very much, we will do that. The problem there was that our daughter not only was seeing our private psychotherapist, but started to also see the psychologist at the school. And the messages were different.
Because the school psychologist was telling her, yes, you are a boy, and affirming this gender identity?
The school psychologist affirmed her feelings, and through the director of the school, reached out to the Swiss Child Protection Agency to get them involved in protecting our child from her parents.
And what action did this agency take?
So the Swiss Child Protection Agency initially called us into a meeting and brought in a representative of what is called Les Refuges. And Les Refuges is an LGBTQI advocacy organization in Geneva. And the representative of Les Refuges explained to us that gender identity was an innate feeling that only the holder of that feeling could know and understand, and that our daughter was really a boy, and we should accept that we have a son. We as parents had become much more informed about gender identity movement, so-called gender affirmative treatment, and so we questioned the Swiss Child Protection Agency and the representative of Les Refuges. And we questioned them based on evidence, based on peer-reviewed scientific and medical evidence. And we made reference to what was happening with the Cass report in the UK. And questioning the Swiss Child Protection Agency and Les Refuges only compounded our problems, because we were then taken to court for not providing adequate medical attention for our daughter.
And your daughter, throughout this situation, had she grown more and more hostile towards you and your wife?
At this point, our daughter had become much more hostile to us. And I believe that's because between the school, the Swiss Child Protection Agency, Les Refuges, there was and is an alliance of institutions which are acting against us as parents. And on the one hand, reinforcing her belief that she was born in the wrong body and she's a boy, and on the other hand, has all the power and the resources to execute their ideology-driven agenda.
Do you have reason to believe that they were portraying you and your wife to your daughter as an enemy of what she wanted?
We as parents were portrayed as transphobic by Les Refuges, by the school, by the Swiss Child Protection Agency. We were framed as transphobic to the Swiss judicial system.
And specifically in this instance, you would not provide hormones and puberty blockers?
Our position was and remains that our daughter needs psychotherapy. And that was reinforced because at the same time as we were on this path with the Alliance of Institutions and the Swiss judiciary, we still had our daughter going to see a private psychologist and a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist provided an initial assessment of our daughter and said, your daughter is suffering from multiple pathologies. She creates different realities. And the problem you're going to have is that these institutions are reinforcing those other realities. And if you don't treat those pathologies, eventually they will manifest themselves. It will be a catastrophe for your family.
Your daughter was taken away from you, correct?
At some point, the school psychologist called the Swiss Child Protection Agency and said she was very concerned that our daughter may be suicidal. Now, any parent needs to take that with the utmost seriousness, and we did. And we went immediately to the hospital, where we were again told by the SPMI, the Swiss Child Protection Agency, just accept that you have a boy. What was unusual about our daughter all of a sudden evincing suicide ideation or suicidality is that not only had she never mentioned any suicide ideation or suicidality in over a year and a half of meeting with our private psychologist, but we know that Les Refuges had assessed her multiple times as not at risk of suicide. Out of nowhere, the school psychologist decided that she needed to intervene and call the Swiss Child Protection Agency and tell them that she was concerned our daughter may be suicidal. And at that point, the Swiss Child Protection Agency went to the school, took her from the school directly to the hospital. Our daughter has never been home since then. She was taken to the hospital for 2 weeks, and the psychiatrist at the hospital, after 5 days, said she's fine to go home with her parents and continue her psychiatric treatment. But our daughter didn't like that. She didn't want to come home. So with the help of the Swiss Child Protection Agency, by this time, the judiciary had also appointed an attorney to represent our daughter against us. They convinced the Swiss judiciary to, under provisional measures, take custody of our child. So she was put at that point in a government residence. And the Swiss judiciary at that point also, under provisional measures, granted the Child Protection Agency partial authority over decisions concerning her medical treatment and ordered that she be treated at Geneva Public Hospital.
Treated for what?
The Swiss judiciary ordered that she receive treatment specialized in gender, which again means the gender affirmative approach.
This is a case in which you have loving parents that are residing in Geneva, Switzerland, that are doing everything in their power to protect their daughter from the harms of gender ideology. At this point, the parents have lost an appeal before Swiss courts in which they are being forced to provide, under threat of criminal charges, the legal documentation to endorse their daughter's so-called sex change under the law. The parents have lost this appeal and are essentially being forced by the courts to hand over this documentation. They have until the end of the month to appeal again.
At this stage, she continues to receive treatment at the Geneva Public Hospital. Outside of that process, she still is in psychotherapy. The psychologist who treats her and the psychologist that meets with us as a family have both assessed and said, including to the Child Welfare Agency, to the SPMI, gender is not the main problem here. And this child needs psychiatric treatment. And this child needs neutral psychiatric treatment. So, aside from the gender affirmative approach at the Geneva Public Hospital, all the other medical professionals are saying, gender's not the main problem. There's a need for psychiatric treatment here.
At what point did you and your wife realize that your daughter had definitively been put in the care of the state and that she wasn't coming home?
When our daughter was in the hospital, we went to a meeting where she was supposed to be released to come home with her family, because the assessment of the psychiatrist at the hospital was this child is fine to go home with her family. There are no protection risks or concerns. She should continue the psychiatric treatment. We went to that meeting looking forward to bringing our daughter home. We showed up to that meeting, and the Child Welfare Agency, the SPMI, and our daughter's court-appointed attorney also showed up. And in that meeting itself, we were informed our daughter wasn't coming home with us, that the Swiss judiciary had decided that she should be placed in a government home.
I cannot imagine the absolute anger and frustration and rage you must have felt in that moment.
When we learned that the Swiss judiciary had taken a decision to remove our daughter from our home, it reinforced our feeling that we had been walking through, and we continue to walk through, a sort of ideology-driven Twilight Zone, where facts don't matter. And putting forward evidence, expressing love for our daughter, is just irrelevant. Then you realize you're up against real power, which is being driven by an ideology. So there's a feeling of powerlessness, a feeling of helplessness, a feeling of despair, a feeling of, how can it be that parents of a child, 16 years old, at this time, 14 years old, how can it be that parents of a 14-year-old child can be brushed aside by the school, by the so-called Child Protection Agency, by medical doctors, on the basis of a belief system which on its surface should be entirely preposterous and absurd, which is that a human being can be born in the wrong body. So it was like entering the Twilight Zone, and it was a deep feeling of despair and helplessness and powerlessness and desperation. You know, we had set up everything at home to bring our daughter home. Balloons, nice dinner, and you have to come home to explain to the little brother what had just happened. And the pain deepens there because the little brother who loves and looks up to his sister looks at his parents and thinks the problem must be you two. How could you not bring my sister home? So then the feeling is, you really are the problem. And you start to ask yourself that as well.
What do you hope will be the outcome of this case?
Foremost, we want our daughter to come home with her family so that we can protect her, so that we can get her the medical attention that she needs. Secondarily, I do want to see a sea change in the treatment regime for children who may be experiencing gender dysphoria or incongruence. And so I am very driven to change the current policies and practices, legal, social, institutional, economic, all of the factors that are driving this perverse ideology, which is destructive for families and so harmful for children.
I think first and foremost, we need to be clear that if this can happen in Switzerland, it can really happen anywhere. This is a country that espouses democratic values, that claims to uphold the rule of law. If a country like this can go down this dark path where parents are essentially at a complete loss as to whether or not they have basic authority over their child, as to whether they can protect their child, then really no one is safe.
Was always very close with my daughter, and when she's herself, there's nobody in the world I'd rather be with. She's brilliant and funny and extraordinarily well read. She read War and Peace when she was 8 years old. So sitting with her, being with her, talking with her, listening to her make music, Nothing could bring me more pleasure. Thinking about what she wants to do or may do in her future, that is life.